A Kitsune Remnant by Red Devil 360, Chapter 15, The Aftermath. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze passed through the two shinobi guards at the entrance of the camp and made a beeline towards the squad of Anbu waiting for him. An Iwo Jonin with black shoulder-length hair stood in the front. Kurotsuchi, I see everything is progressing, Naruto asked with a smile and a gesture to walk with him. Kurotsuchi nodded and fell in line with the others Naruto made to progress further in the camp. Yes, the last of the men are to arrive in 2 months, and the equipment and supplies another month later. Captain Shikamaru is overlooking the finalization of the wooden palisade around the camp, and the first watchtower are being set up. For the time being, we have regular patrols to cover our blind spots, he answered, walking beside his commander. So 3 months until this damned war is over at best, Naruto hummed as he folded his arms behind his back. As good as it will be for the war to end so soon, it is unlikely. There are several more bases for the invasion in Water Country, like we are with a few on the coast of Fire Country. It's a logistical nightmare. Not to mention taking the island will be difficult as they've had the whole war to dig in, Kutsuchi pointed out matter-of-factly. Naruto sighed. It can never be easy, can it? He murmured. Very well, I want logistical plans and reports on my desk by the weekend. And while we're at it, have all the battalion leaders give a report on equipment and ration levels as well as a list of the men and capabilities, he ordered, picking up the pace of his stride. If we're going to end this war, I want to do it with as little loss as possible. Kurtsuchi bowed and ran off to carry out the orders, while Naruto and the other Anbu squad carried on to Naruto's command tent. A few hours later, Naruto still looking over the beginnings of the reports when Shikamaru burst into the tent in a fashion that clearly meant he wasn't there for social reports. Commander, we have been at least a special group on the outskirts of the camp. We think the leader might be a Shini, he hurriedly reported. Naruto sat up and cocked an eyebrow. Is that right? He put down his pen and slipped on his fox mask. Show me. He followed Shikamaru out of the tent, and his Zambu squad detail dutifully followed. As they progressed through the camp, the sound of cheering, shouting, and curses became louder and more recognizable. The two shared a look and slightly sped up the speed of their walk into a light jog, and before long came across a large crowd jeering at something in the center. The two shared another look, and Naruto slightly boosted his voice with chakra. What in Kami's name is going on? He yelled fiercely. Immediately the noise stopped and was replaced with deadly silence. The shinobi at the back of the group turned and went pale when they saw his mask, quickly moving out of the way as if to avoid his penetrating gaze. Like a wave of parting, a hole began forming in the circle, and Naruto moved slightly through it, the killing intent directed at them to get his point across enough. Before long they made it to the center, and what he saw made his blood boil, and the killing's intent that was before nothing more than an inconvenience for some turned suffocating. In the center sat undoubtedly a Shni, but she was covered in small marks and cuts. Her hair was a mess, and she was clutching desperately at the remains of her uniform that were completely failing at keeping her decent. The reason as to her state was not hard to fathom. The Schnee family was not the most famous currently in the elemental nations, and the shinobi under his command may have been looking for some payback for some of the atrocities that the invaders had done. She remarkably had a look of defiance, if slightly scared, on her face, however, that completely evaporated when she locked eyes with him and inevitably his mask, so she knew who he was. Oh joy! Naruto surveyed the surrounding faces that were looking at him as terrified as the Schnee was. However, he couldn't be sure who were doing the deed and who were simply watching. He would have to punish them all then. He turned back to the woman and unclasped his cloak, kneeling and draped it over her uncovered body, ignoring her look of shock, and turned around as another set of footsteps joined his and Shika's. Kurosutsu, take her to the medical tent and get her looked at. Don't leave her alone, he ordered the woman, who nodded with a grim look and gently led the shell-shocked woman away. He studied the crowd for a few moments before speaking. I have never been so disappointed about my own kinsman than I have now, he began, and he was pleased to note a few disappointed faces in the crowd. Well, what do you have to say for yourselves? They were silent for a short time before someone gathered up the courtesy to speak up. They do it to us. Some of us wanted payback. Payback. They think us murderers and monsters, attacking our lands with foreign armies, hoping to beat us into submission with technology we had only dreamed about here. And we are winning, Naruto yelled, looking towards the crowd. They came here with their vaunted technology, thinking they would have an easy victory. They were wrong. We have countered their tactics, beaten their armies, and slaughtered their soldiers. Is that not payback enough? That they, so high and mighty, were shown their inferiority to us. We are better than them, so don't sink to their level. Naruto spoke, bringing a significant amount of faces to now bear guilty and shameful ones. Seeing that he had put his point across, he nodded. All here present shall report to my tent at 0700 hours tomorrow to receive your punishment. I have memorized all your chakra signatures, so don't bother trying to sneak away, he ordered before walking away. He made his way to the medical tents and entered the one that contained Kurotsuchi's source of chakra. They pulled the tent flap out of the way and walked into spotting Kurotsuchi standing in front of a medical bed, which had currently pulled around it. How is she? A little shocked, but definitely better than she could have been, Kurotsuchi answered, and Naruto hummed slightly. A light rustle grew louder behind the curtain, which was eventually pulled back, revealing two medical nin in the shinigi and a white medical kimono. When they spotted him, both nins bowed, while the other woman looked at him in shock and slight fear. Namikaze-sama, they bowed. He waved them off. Leave us, he calmly ordered. The two obeyed without answer. He glanced at the Iwa nin next to him, but all he got in return was a hopeless shrug. Turning back to the woman before him, he sighed. To the shock of both women, Naruto reached up to his mask, revealing his youthful face. Activating a seal placed in the tents for interrogation injured prisoners, he spoke. My name is Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. May I have the pleasure of learning yours? The woman was silent for a while, simply staring at the man thousands believed to be a monster. Winter. Kitsune, can you open the door? Ruby asked attentively to the door blocking Team Ruby's access to their own room, having spent the night in Periwinkle's when they failed the early night. I don't think he can hear us guys, Blake commented blankly. Well, he better, 'cause I've worn this dress for nearly 12 hours now, and I need to change and clean my hair, Yang stated bitterly. If this continues, you can always use our shower, Ren offered from the back of the group. And what will they change into? We spouted out helpfully. I'm sure I have some clothes they can wear. They might be a bit baggy, but you might have some stuff Ruby and Nora might have something as well. Pyra shrugged. We've already slept in your room overnight. We can't ask any more from you, Yang said as Ruby knocked again. They waited in silence for another minute before a thump was heard on the other side of the door, and the soft patter of footsteps gradually closer to the door. Eventually, a scraping noise against the door notified them of his proximity, and the group backed off as the door swung open, and a heavily disheveled shinobi stuck his head out, a bandage visible across his forehead. He looked closely at the group before asking, "What time is it?" "It's nearly 12," they answered in strange unison. Kitsune blinked and nodded, opening the door further to let them in. In doing so he revealed his heavily bandaged body, angry red blotches in some places where the wounds had continued to bleed even after being treated. "You're still bleeding?" Ruby squeaked in slight horror as she looked at the bandages. "No, I stopped bleeding in the night. I just need to change the bandages," Naruto explained as he turned to enter the bathroom as, to do as much. "No, yesterday my sister yelled something at you, Uzumaki. What does that mean?" we asked as the group filed into the room. Uzumaki means whirlpool, he answered from behind the closed door. Whirlpool? Why would we sister call you that? I mean, you were really fast yesterday, like really, really fast, which I mean could look like a whirlpool in the right situation, but considering we couldn't really see what was happening with all the slashing and bashing, we can't really make a good comparison unless we sister had supervision and can comprehend things on another level entirely, maybe even see in alternate dimensions. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Everyone stared at Nora in slight bewilderment as what had started as a perfectly reasonable question turned into what Nora basically represented. Uzumaki is my name, Naruto stated simply and revealing nothing more on the subject. Your name is Uzumaki? Blake asked with a slight surprise at having learned something personally about the blonde. It's my surname, he clarified. Wait, how does Whis' sister know your surname? Ruby asked in confusion. It was you, Whis said quietly. What? Pa returned to her partner. It was you who saved my sister in the elemental nations when she was captured. How she knows you, Whis pieced together. Naruto smirked underneath his mask. Very good, Whis, he muttered so no one outside would hear. Wait, your sister met Kitsune in the elemental nations? Yang inquired. Whis nodded the affirmation. Then why did she seem so angry with him then? Because I disguised myself, he answered plainly. No one is meant to know I'm here, and I mean to keep it that way. How did she know it was you then afterwards? Ruby questioned curiously. I saw her trying to avoid you at the dance. Because in an intense fight like that, I was more worried about trying to survive than to keep an illusion up, he revealed as he stepped out the bathroom, wearing not only new bandages but also a new Jonin outfit. Minus the harness, it seemed the others had also taken the time to change in his absence. The others grew silent at that, the reply of the dance fight going through their minds. They had all been sure that their friend couldn't become any more both terrifying and awe-inspiring, but that night he did single-handedly fighting off more than 30 adult shinobi, and then defeating someone who looked if able to defeat the entire school faculty in single combat. The fact that they could hardly even witness him in the act while it played out before their very eyes only furthered the apparent chasm that separated the group and him in terms of strength. It went unsaid how he actually went about the act. They all knew he killed for a living. He even said so himself. But to then witness the act itself, millimeters from their eyes, it puts everything else into perspective at just how deadly their friend is, and though they never admitted to the man himself, they were slightly scared. Now we're all here. Sit. Naruto ordered, sitting on his own bed. Knowing where this is going, I have somewhere to be. Yang predictably tried to bail, only for a gust of wind to knock her off her feet and onto her partner's bed. The others, realizing that this was a non-negotiable, sat somewhere as well. Naruto folded his arms and legs and gave a pointed stare at the group opposite him. I am so disappointed in you guys. I thought you were mature enough to avoid doing something that stupid, but it seems I thought wrong. The group collectively wilted. But I can't claim you for something I would have done. What? It was Blake who spoke up first. When I was younger, I was much like you, idealistic and hoping I could change the world if I just knocked a few heads together. When I graduated from the academy, I believed I was king of the world and could take it on with naught but my fists. However, as I grew older and experienced the world, I began realizing how wrong that kind of thought process was, that sometimes the path of caution is preferable to that of the cannon. What you did was most certainly not cautious, and you were punished for it. He spoke, finished by pointedly looking at Whis and Ruby. Kitsune, Pyro spoke up, causing the man to turn his attention to her. We are so sorry we betrayed you like that. If I know you are, but that doesn't mean you were completely out of the fire for what you did. Hindsight is a bitch, after all, he admonished. However, I can forgive you for what you have done, because I know you have learned your lesson, just as I had, because the best lessons in life are the ones you go through. So Are we friends again? Ruby asked hopefully. Naruto sighed. We never stopped being friends, Ruby, he said, opening his arms. His theory proved correctly when a red missile slammed into his chest, causing him to suppress a groan of pain when she jostled his wounds. He patted her head slightly to get her attention. Okay there, girl, loosen up that grip a little bit, he pleaded slightly, which thankfully proved successfully, and she backed off with a slightly sheepish smile. Koff drew his attention to the white-clad female in the dorm. Now that's out of the way, I never got to say thank you for saving my life. Twice, Wace admitted. So, thank you. Wace bowed low to the ground, actually bowed to someone. This alone meant that she was serious. Naruto smiled under the mask. You're more than welcome, Whis, he said, opening his arms slightly. Whis blushed slightly in embarrassment, but needed no further invitation and accepted the hug. I was so scared, she whispered so only he could hear. I know, he whispered back, and released the hug after a reassuring squeeze. Oh, Ruby, I just remembered something. Yang perked up as the conversation shifted away from yesterday's events. She walked over to her desk and grabbed a tube in the mail. Dad sent us something in the mail, and I forgot about it till now. She opened one end of the tube and bended it, allowing a black cylinder to fall out and onto the floor. It bounced around for a few moments before popping open, revealing it to have been a dog. Naruto blinked in surprise. A corgi had been transported in a container that small. That was physically impossible, and this was coming from someone who could rotationally walk on water. Just as he heard a cheerful squeal of "Zwei," his vision was suddenly obscured in a way to settle across his shoulders and head. The room grew quiet, and Naruto sighed, immediately noticed the smell of lavender. Before he could contain anything, the PA turned on outside. Would all students please report to the auditorium, and will Kitsune please head to the headmaster's office? On that note, the police would no please Team Ruby and Periwinkle accompany him. There are people here to meet you. Without another word to anyone, Naruto calmly walked to the door and opened it, crouching slightly to make sure that the cat fondness currently wrapped around his head wouldn't hit the door frame on his way out. The walk across the plaza was mostly quiet, and Blake had since disengaged herself, even though the small dog accompanied them on their walk to Osmond's office. The results of last night's battle had many students stopping and staring at both him and the damage caused. It seemed as though Linda had yet to get around to fixing it. Feeling a small tug on his arm, he looked down at Blake quietly, gesturing to an alley off to them to, off to the side. Glancing at the others, he quickly created two clones, one of which hinged into Blake before shooting them into the alley, while making sure to stabilize Blake when she stumbled slightly. Whoop! He was cut off when a black blur impacted his chest, much like Ruby had done earlier. Blake buried her head into his chest and her shoulders shook slightly. I'm sorry. This is all my fault, she sobbed, clutching at his flak jacket in a vain attempt to disappear into it. Naruto sighed, having figured at some point this would come up. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders and one on the back of her head, the girl tensing up slightly when he brushed her ears slightly but made no effort to move. Do you remember when we talked a week ago? Blake remained silent. We agreed that even if we did things different, we can never be sure that things would change, Naruto repeated. Do you remember? Blake nodded slightly. I remember, she whispered. What happened may have been you doing, but who knows what might have happened if you hadn't gone. Although your methods are up for debate, you managed to eliminate a White Fang cell, fought a hardened criminal for a decent amount of time before help could arrive. Naruto reasoned, but the shinobi yesterdays, you got hurt because of me. Waze almost died because of me. You almost died because of me, she cried, looking up at him. Naruto smiled slightly and pushed Blake back, holding her by her shoulders. Perhaps yes, but perhaps no, Naruto mollified. As a shinobi, death in my line of work, is more commonplace than living through it. Remember when we first met? Blake nodded. Death is almost a part of your profession, and it is something you and the others will have to face sooner than later. Did you not notice how many students were at the initiation, where were only 3 teams formed? Naruto reasoned, bringing a thoughtful look to the Faunus' face. But, Blake began again. No more buts. Naruto cut her off, moving his hands from either shoulders to her cheeks to make her look him in the eyes. You may have been partly at fault for the injuries of your teammates and Periwinkle, but not for mine, he reassured. What do you mean? How long did I say it took to get from the elemental nations to here? Naruto questioned, still looking her in the eyes. 4 to 5 weeks, she answered with a frown before her eye widened. They attacked a week after we did. Were already here. Precisely, he confirmed with a reassuring smile. While they were no doubt here for me, the only thing you did was likely force their hand, for which I do not blame you for. Blake opened her mouth to protest again, but clamped shut at Naruto's look. My friends are very precious to me. I do not fear being hurt because of them, nor do I fear death if it means I can save them. Naruto finished with a soft smile down at the Faunus. Blake closed her eyes and nodded, a few more tears escaping, this time with a smile though. Naruto brought her back into the hug and squeezed her tight, understanding her feelings on the matter. Could you do something for me, Kitsune? Blake quietly spoke up. Could you maybe touch my ears? I like the feeling and it's comforting, she asked meekly, blushing slightly against the man's jacket. Naruto's mouth opened and closed a few times underneath his mask before it settled on a smile. His hand slowly moved up from her back to her head, where he gently began to stroke and caress her ears. Blake tensed up in his arms before also almost literally melting with a content sigh from the sensation atop her head. The elevator ride up to Osman's office was quiet, and Naruto had since replaced both clones with their real counterparts. The doors dinged and opened, revealing the headmaster sat behind his desk, Goodwitch beside him. Unfortunately, Ironwood and Winter were also there, standing quietly off to the side. Naruto also sensed another, but didn't comment on the matter. Headmaster, Professor, others, he greeted sarcastically when they reached the desk. Ospen held up a hand to halt Ospen's likely retort. Kitsune, you are doing remarkably well for someone who was limping out of the dance hall yesterday, he noted. Naruto shrugged. Family genes, he said simply. Indeed, in any case, you have the school's thanks for your deeds yesterday. Osmond thanked with a short bow of his head, which Glinda reluctantly followed. Yes, now that out of the way, the general interrupted, stepping forward. We're not finished. 5 of the shinobi escaped. We managed to track them heading east before we lost them, he informed, giving the other shinobi a critical look. East? Naruto questioned. At Ironwood's nod, he closed his eyes and folded his arms behind his back. He was quiet for a few minutes, and more than a couple of times some in the room went to question what he was trying to accomplish, only to be halted by the headmaster. 20 minutes northeast, he stated eventually. Glinda glanced at Ospen. That sounds like they're at Mount Glen. As if sensing the confusion, we spoke up. Mount Glen was an attempted expansion led the Kingdom of Vale a few decades ago. However, it failed when it was overrun by Grimm. Sounds like the perfect place to hide. The mysterious person at the back spoke up in a rough voice, making all but Naruto spin round in shock. Uncle Crow, Ruby squealed, rushing at the man and tackling him in a hug. She grinned up at him. Hi, hey Squirt, I heard you've been getting in a lot of trouble lately. The elder, more degraded looking man answered with a head pat as Ruby hung off his arm. Yeah, Ruby admitted. Crow grinned and leaned down. Good job, kiddo. You're really living up to the family name, he whispered, making Ruby grin. What is he doing here? We hissed at the headmaster. Considering it was his niece involved a week ago, he wanted to check in on them. Osmond answered blankly. Well, I'm not happy to see you, uncle. Where's Dad? Yang asked as she gave the man a hug. He got caught up with a job, which is why you have why he doesn't have long. He'll be but should be back from for the Vital Festival in a month. Crow answered. Anyway, the five shinobi that got away don't appear to be alone, Naruto continued, unperturbed. How so? Aspen brunched his fingers and leaned forward. There appears to be more people with them, considering they have no chakra. I can only assume they are the White Fang. Oh, because I believe that I recognize the Roman torch work among them, Naruto explained. Then they are preparing something. We must attack them at once. While we had the upper hand, Armwood argued, striking his fist into his hands. Naruto snorted. We I did all the work yesterday. All your men did was die, he said irritably. Besides, even if they don't have a sensor, they'll know you're coming from miles away. They'll be gone before you're even arrived. I'll be going alone. They got away from me, so it shall be me who finish them off, Naruto said. Alone? Yesterday you were limping out the hall with a hole in your chest, Glenda explained. Naruto glanced at Winter, making sure she kept her mouth shut. As I said, family genetics. However, I'll leave tonight and travel through it. That will give me more than enough time to get back to full, he eventually placated. Do you even know the way? Crow suggested, literally stepping into the conversation, an arm around both his nieces. Does a dog know the way when he follows food with his nose? Naruto retorted with a raised eyebrow. Crow chuckled. I suppose not. I have no objections. Ozpin once again cut in before Ironwood could once again start an argument. Good. Naruto smiled underneath his mask. Welp, I have stuff to prepare for now, so I'll leave you whatever you're about to do with this lot. Bye. And he was gone. The room stared at the dispatching smoke that signaled Kitsun's abrupt exit before Osmond coughed into his mug. Well, yes, now on to the matter of why I called you here, he spoke, looking over his fingers at the young students. Naruto stood on one of the accessible roofs of Beacon, quietly looking over the grounds as he let the cool night air wash around him. He was fully kitted out, both shuriken and kunai pouches replenished and present, with his new katana sat heavily but comfortably on his left hip and a replacement Kanto on his shoulders to replace the one he lost. The wounds he had healed nicely with the combination of his Uzumaki genes and the QB. Those all persisted would be done with by the time he arrived at this Mount Glen, and he'd be at 100% to deal with the interlopers. The trouble was working out why especially the missing men were working with the White Fang, a terrorist organization in another country altogether. While it wasn't uncommon for missing men to work together every so often, they were mainly loners, banding in groups no larger than 3 or 5 due to latent mistrust between them. So for a group as large as 30 to appear and openly challenge him was disconcerting. The only conclusion that he could draw for such a thing was that someone was organizing them in a recognizable fighting force. The Mexican were notable fickle people, so they'd have to be somebody of strength to make them recognize their leadership. However, nobody came and intently into mind. All high-tiered shinobi were accounted for and were loyal, so it would have to be another Mexican doing it. And again, and that came to mind, most either didn't have the resources or the ability, the rest weren't strong enough, troubling indeed. He shifted slightly when he heard someone walk up the stairs to the roof. He momentarily reached out with his senses to identify it as Yang climbing the stairs, which was unusual, which he'd been here. He'd never attempted to do such a thing, so she must be doing come up for a reason. No one else was up here except for him. Eventually Yang reached the top and pushed the door open. Can we talk? Naruto shrugged. You wouldn't have come all the way up here if it wasn't important. Naruto studied Yang and noticed she looked strangely meek and subdued. What's up? Before he could continue, Yang grabbed him in a hug, startling him slightly at the subtleness of it. What was with people hugging him lately? Okay then. he muttered, and wound her arms around her to complete the hug. "I never said thank you," she muttered in the end. "For what? Helping? In the sense you saved my sister twice. We've talked about this, baby, but I never truly thanked you for it. Ruby is the most precious thing in my life. My mother left, Uncle Crow isn't around often, and Dad kind of broke down after Summer died. Ruby, though, Ruby was always there. Not that she had much of a choice, but that's besides the point." Yang spoke quietly, but full of affection for her sister. "That's why I can never pay you back for what you did. If Ruby had been killed, I don't know what I would have done. Probably something stupid." Yang tightened her grip on him. "You have nothing to thank me for, Yang, but I do. I have I was too weak to save her before, and I was too weak now," Yang said haughtily. Naruto sighed. "You're not weak, Yang. Far from it, in fact. The fact is, there will always be someone stronger than you in the world, and you have had the unfortunate luck to meet one of them," Naruto said. "So there are people stronger than you?" "Yes, even stronger than me, and I pray to every deity out there that you never have to meet them," Naruto whispered with a grim look. Yang sighed herself and backed off slightly from the hug, causing Naruto to release her. "In any case, thank you." She stepped up to the largest man and pecked him on his mask-covered cheek. "I doubt I can ever repay you fully, so I hope this helps." She smiled up to him and turned on her heel and disappeared back down the stairs. Naruto blinked. Of all the things, that was something he was not expecting. He touched the area where she had kissed, and this was something he'd have to fix when he returned back. Right now he had to leave if he wanted to make it to Mount Glen before morning dawned. With complete focus on his objective now and no more distractions, he turned and left off the roof and disappeared into the night. End of chapter 15.